that it's more intensively used. We're not walking on the beds, we have permanent paths. We don't have to walk between the crops, we can hopefully cultivate from the side of the beds. It also provides a microclimate where when it's colder weather, the cold air moves down onto the paths, leaving it warmer on top, and hopefully this will be a benefit growing in colder weather. And those are the main reasons we're going for it. Ease of labour. It does require a lot of work to start with though, and it has been a long slog. Myself and Megan have both been working 12-hour days, and but I think it's paying off. We shall see next year to how much it has paid off. If we keep weeding, it'll eventually they just won't come back.
Obviously, care of the soil is really important in organic growing systems because rather than using the conventional approach of treating the soil like a sponge and just adding artificial chemicals, through an organic system you nurture the soil and the soil feeds plants. So we've got compost, which is kitchen scraps, horse manure, bracken and seaweed, and then we've got some other compost heaps which are the same but just without the kitchen scraps, and that makes sure that you're getting all the nutrients that the plants will need, but in a form that feeds the soil so that it encourages life in the soil, lots of microorganisms, and that's much better for the plants. I'm just chopping up the chicory, which is bolted. So this was a crop that we had in over winter, and it's bolted, which means that it goes to flower. And at that point, all of the energy is going into the plant reproducing, so that the leaves are no longer as tasty. So that's it, and we just take them up and chop them, and then they go into the compost. The length of time it takes compost to break down depends on what's gone into it. If you've got obviously a lot of stalky material, then it's going to take longer to break down. And it also depends largely on whether you are doing aerobic or anaerobic composting, so hot composting or cold composting. If you've got lots of air in the compost, which you get by turning it regularly, then the compost heats up, and that's a much faster process because the bacteria need air in order to thrive. So it's the activity of the bacteria, I believe, that creates the heat. And I mean, compost can get really hot, and that's beneficial as well, because if you do happen to have any weed seeds in there, then those should be killed off in the process of the hot composting. So in order to get the hot composting, you need to make sure that the compost is neither too wet nor too dry. So you can do that by, if your compost is too wet, you can add dry materials like bracken, and if you found that it's too dry, so for example at the moment the pony manure that we're putting on, the seaweed's all drying up really quickly, so everything that's going in is quite dry. So we're adding a bit of compost activator, which we've made by putting seaweed into bins of water and leaving that for a month or so, and then the water that comes out is a really good compost activator, so we put that on, that creates more moisture, and it also is beneficial just in terms of getting the bacteria kick-started. Cold compost you can just leave and it will take maybe even up to a year, but with hot compost, if you're turning it regularly, you can get a good compost if you're chopping up the ingredients that are going into it in maybe 2 or 3 months. One of the really key parts of organic production systems is a crop rotation, and that basically involves grouping plants together according to their susceptibility to pests and diseases and also their nutritional requirements, and then you divide your plot up into normally a minimum of 4 different areas. We've got 6 here, so we've got a 6-fold crop rotation taking place, and then you plant those plants in those groupings and rotate them each year. And the benefits of a crop rotation are that they break up the pest and disease cycle. So rather than growing one crop continually in the same place, which allows the pests to reproduce, you keep moving them, so that it's good from that point of view. It's also good because different plants have different nutritional requirements. So for example, we have the brassicas, which take a lot of nitrogen out of the soil. We plant those in the bed that had previously had leguminous plants in it, because legumes have nodules on their roots which bind nitrogen into the soil from the air. So in that way you're feeding the plants naturally and dealing with their different requirements in a natural way without having to add any artificial fertilizers. You also find that different plants obviously have different root systems, so some will have very long roots and some will have more shallow roots, and so if you rotate the crops, it also helps to make sure that you're maintaining good soil structure, which is good for drainage of water through the soil. So crop rotation is really beneficial for all sorts of reasons, and in an organic system it's essential because you can't fall back on artificial pest control, pesticides and artificial fertilizers. So planning your crop rotation is really important, and getting that foundation when you first start. So all gardening books have advice on what factors you need to consider. Things like brassicas shouldn't be in the same piece of land for at least 4 years, which is why you would have a minimum of a 4-fold crop rotation to make sure that the brassicas aren't in the same piece of land for 4 years, and that's because of club root.
In winter crops, we're looking towards the brassicas, I think, more than anything. Brassicas and the chard. Though I did notice this earlier this year, the chard was getting so beaten by the weather that I resorted to putting a plastic covering over it, a cloche over them. They weren't on raised beds at that time, and that allowed them the chance to give us a quality of leaf that was good enough for the kitchen use. Otherwise, I think you're looking mostly towards the broccolis and the cabbages. Looking to extend our ability to grow undercover, possibly a geodesic dome, but if not, definitely another polytunnel. The thing with the dome is it can withstand a high wind and is glass. It's got a 30-year lifespan, whereas the covering for the polytunnel, although it's a small one, last year was costing £500, and you can expect, if you're lucky, 4 years out of it. So I'd like to go for glass, but that's if and the proposal is accepted. But growing undercover extends our season by 10 weeks easily.
We've both been doing the South End garden for 10 years. Before that it was the Lighthouse families divided into 4 gardens, so it had been cultivated. So it was pretty overgrown, but a few people from Holy Island had started doing stuff there. There was asparagus then, and fruit trees, gooseberries, apples. Were the pears already in as well?
No.
No.
No, it was just the one apple tree left.
Was it one apple?
Yeah.
But yeah, so now, at the moment, we're harvesting asparagus, broad beans. We've still got last year's kale that's got a bit of leaves on, but we've got the new kale. Same with